On what should have been the happiest day of her life, Olivia Carter ran. She was seconds away from marrying the perfect man, until her loyal cat, Shadow, exposed a chilling truth. A secret so dark, it shattered everything she thought she knew. Who was Ethan Blackwood really? And how far would he go to keep his past buried? Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe for more thrilling stories. You won't want to miss what's coming next. The morning sun filtered through sheer white curtains, casting golden streaks across the polished wooden floor of Olivia Carter's apartment. The room smelled faintly of lavender and fresh linen, remnants of last night's attempt to force herself into a peaceful sleep. It hadn't worked. She had tossed and turned, her mind tangled in an unease she couldn't name, but refused to acknowledge. Today should have been a morning of excitement, of joy. A week from now, she would stand before family and friends pledging her love and loyalty to Ethan Blackwood, the man who had swept into her life like a perfect dream. Everything about him had been right from the start. His easy smile, his effortless confidence, the way he seemed to know exactly what to say and when to say it. He was charming without trying, successful without arrogance, and attentive in a way that made her feel like she was the only woman in the world. And yet, as Olivia sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the engagement ring on her finger, something inside her twisted. It was a feeling she couldn't explain, like standing at the edge of a cliff with no wind, no warning, just an overwhelming certainty that a fall was inevitable. A soft rustling behind her made her turn, and there he was. Shadow, her sleek black cat, perched on the windowsill, his piercing green eyes locked onto her with unnerving intensity. He had been acting strangely ever since Ethan proposed. Olivia had laughed about it at first, teasing that her cat was just possessive, but the laughter had faded as Shadow's behavior grew more unsettling. He had always been affectionate, the type to curl up in her lap and purr for hours, but now, whenever Ethan was around, he was different. The first time Ethan had visited after their engagement, Shadow had simply watched him, silent, unmoving, his tail flicking with slow deliberation. Then the hissing started. At first, just low growls under his breath, nothing aggressive, but over the past few weeks, it had escalated. Every time Ethan got too close, Shadow would arch his back, his sharp fangs bared in warning. Ethan laughed it off, calling it cute and saying, "Guess I have to win him over, huh?" But Olivia had noticed the flicker of irritation in his eyes, the way his smile tightened for just a second too long. Now, as Shadow leapt down from the window and padded across the room, Olivia sighed and ran a hand through her hair. "You're going to have to get over this," she murmured, scratching behind his ears. "He's not going anywhere." Shadow pressed his head into her palm, but his tail swished sharply behind him, his body still tense. He didn't believe her. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, breaking the silence. She picked it up and saw a text from Harper. "Harper brunch, my place, 1 hour, no excuses." Olivia smiled despite herself. Harper Reed had been her best friend since college, the one person who could see through her even when she wasn't sure what she was feeling herself. If anyone could shake her out of this weird mood, it was her. An hour later, Olivia was seated at Harper's kitchen counter, watching her best friend aggressively stab at a grapefruit half. Harper, with her wild red curls and sharp brown eyes, was the complete opposite of Olivia. Bold, unfiltered, and completely unwilling to accept anything less than the truth. "So," Harper said, chewing thoughtfully, "you look like you haven't slept in 3 days. That's normal for brides to be, right?" Olivia rolled her eyes. I slept fine. Harper snorted. Liar, what's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Olivia took a sip of coffee. It's just, I don't know, pre-wedding jitters? Harper arched a brow. Pre-wedding jitters are one thing. You look like you just walked out of a horror movie. Olivia hesitated, then sighed. It's Shadow. He's been acting weird around Ethan. Like, really weird. Hissing, growling, staring at him like he's... She stopped herself. Like, he's what? Harper leaned in, eyes gleaming. Like he's dangerous, Olivia admitted quietly. For the first time that morning, Harper didn't laugh. She set down her fork and folded her arms. Olivia. I know how it sounds, Olivia said quickly. It's just a cat, right? It's not like he has a sixth sense. Harper tilted her head. You sure about that? Olivia frowned. What do you mean? There are actual studies, Harper said, about animals sensing things humans don't. Danger, illness, bad energy. There was this one case I read where a woman's dog wouldn't stop growling at her fiancé. Turned out the guy was cheating. Pets know things, Liv, and they don't lie. Olivia laughed, but it was forced. Are you seriously suggesting that Shadow knows something about Ethan that I don't? Harper didn't answer right away. Instead, she studied Olivia carefully, like she was trying to decide how far to push. Finally, she said, I'm saying if something feels off, don't ignore it. The words settled into Olivia's chest like a stone. She had spent so long convincing herself that she was just nervous, that it was all in her head. But was it? Or was there something real behind the unease that crept up her spine whenever she was alone with her thoughts? By the time Olivia got home, the sun had begun its slow descent, casting deep amber hues across the skyline. She opened the door to her apartment, kicking off her heels, but stopped short when she saw Shadow sitting in the middle of the living room, his body tense, his ears perked forward. He was staring at the hallway. Olivia followed his gaze, frowning. Shadow? What is it? The cat didn't move. His tail flicked once, twice. Then he let out a low, guttural growl. A chill ran down Olivia's spine. Slowly, she stepped forward, glancing toward the hallway. The door to her bedroom was ajar. Had she left it open? She was sure she hadn't. Heart pounding, she pushed the door open. Everything looked normal, except for one thing. The closet door. It was open just an inch. A sliver of darkness against the dimly lit room. Shadow's growl deepened, his sleek body lowering into a hunter's stance. Olivia's throat went dry. Taking a slow breath, she reached out and yanked the closet door open. Nothing, just clothes. Boxes. A neat row of Ethan's suits hanging where he always kept them when he stayed over. She let out a shaky breath, laughing at herself. See, Shadow? Nothing. But Shadow didn't relax. He stayed rooted in place, staring at the closet. His tail flicked, his fur still bristling. Olivia hesitated. Then, for no reason at all, she stepped forward and reached into the pocket of Ethan's favorite navy suit. Her fingers brushed against something cold, metal. She pulled it out and stared at it, her breath catching in her throat. It was a key, a small, silver key she had never seen before. Shadow let out a sharp hiss, and for the first time, Olivia felt it too. The certainty, the quiet, undeniable knowledge. Something wasn't right. Olivia stared at the small silver key resting in the palm of her hand, its edges cool and unfamiliar against her skin. It wasn't hers. She knew every single thing in her apartment, and this key didn't belong. Shadow hadn't moved. He was still positioned in front of the open closet, his tail twitching, his eyes locked onto the suits as if they concealed something far more sinister than fabric and silk ties. A heavy unease settled over Olivia as she glanced back at Ethan's things. Why had he never mentioned this key? What did it open? She swallowed, forcing herself to shake off the feeling creeping up her spine. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it belonged to his office, or a safety deposit box, or something else entirely. Shaking her head, she set the key on the dresser and ran a hand through her hair. She was spiraling, letting Harper's words get into her head, letting Shadow's paranoia turn into her own. She needed to breathe, to stop overanalyzing. But as she turned away, Shadow let out another soft growl. She froze. That growl wasn't his usual irritated grumble when she moved him off her lap or forgot to feed him on time. This one was low, primal, edged with something that sent a chill down her arms. "Shadow," she whispered, turning back toward him. He didn't break eye contact with the suits. A soft knock on the front door made her jump. The sound echoed through the quiet apartment, rattling against the eerie stillness. Her breath caught. For a second, she didn't move. Didn't breathe. She didn't know why it unsettled her so much. People knocked on doors all the time. But something about the timing, about the way Shadow stiffened even more, made her pulse spike. She moved toward the entrance, peering through the peephole. "Ethan?" She exhaled, her shoulders slumping in relief as she unlocked the door and opened it. "Hey," he said, stepping inside. He leaned down to kiss her cheek, but she hesitated just a second too long before tilting her head toward him. If he noticed, he didn't say anything. Instead, he dropped his bag on the couch, rolling his shoulders. "Long day. You wouldn't believe the mess at work." Olivia barely heard him. Her eyes flickered toward the dresser where the key lay, right in plain sight. She needed to move it. Now. Before she could, Ethan's gaze followed hers. "What's that?" Her heart lurched. She forced a casual shrug. "A key I found in your suit jacket." His reaction was subtle, barely noticeable, but she caught it. A split-second pause, the faintest twitch of his fingers before he reached for it. "Oh," he said lightly, picking it up. "Must have forgotten about it." Olivia studied him carefully. "What does it open?" Ethan smiled, but it felt off, forced. "A storage unit, nothing exciting." A storage unit. The answer was so simple, so reasonable, and yet, Shadow hissed. The sound sliced through the air, sharp and unrelenting. Olivia turned in time to see the cat's fur bristle, his ears flattening. He had never done that before. Not like this. Ethan let out a short, humorless laugh. "Seriously, what is wrong with your cat?" Olivia reached for Shadow instinctively, scooping him up into her arms. He was tense, his muscles coiled like a spring, but as soon as she touched him, his growls quieted into a low rumble, though his eyes never left Ethan. "He's just been acting weird lately," she murmured. Ethan shook his head, setting the key in his pocket. "I'll be honest, Liv, I don't think it's cute anymore." A pit formed in her stomach. "What do you mean?" "He's aggressive, protective, maybe even possessive." Ethan exhaled, rubbing his jaw. "Look, I know you love him, but Maybe it's time to set some boundaries. Boundaries? A cold prickle ran down Olivia's spine. She swallowed, shifting Shadow's weight in her arms. He's never been aggressive before. Ethan gave a half smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. Yeah, well, I guess I just bring out the worst in him. The words felt like an accusation. Something shifted in the room then, something Olivia couldn't quite place. The space between them suddenly felt too small, the air too heavy. She wanted to change the subject, to push past the tension curling at the edges of her thoughts. "Are you staying over tonight?" she asked. Ethan studied her for a second too long before answering. "No. I've got work early. Big case." She nodded, forcing a smile. "Oh." But even as she walked him to the door, even as he kissed her goodbye, even as he disappeared down the hallway, she couldn't shake the feeling in her gut. Something wasn't right. She closed the door and leaned against it, exhaling shakily. Shadow jumped from her arms, padding back toward the bedroom, as if his job was done for the night. Olivia glanced toward the closet again, then at the empty space where the key had been. A storage unit. Maybe. But the way Ethan reacted, the way he dismissed Shadow's behavior, the way he pocketed that key just a little too quickly, she wasn't convinced. And for the first time since their engagement, she let herself wonder if she was supposed to be. The next morning, Olivia woke up to the sound of soft scratching. She blinked, groggy, before realizing the noise was coming from the front door. Shadow was sitting there, pawing at the base of it, his tail flicking anxiously. "Shadow," she mumbled, rubbing her eyes. "What are you doing?" The cat didn't look at her. He just kept scratching. A sense of unease coiled in her stomach as she pushed out of bed and crossed the room. Just as she reached the door, a soft knock echoed on the other side. Her breath hitched. No one was supposed to be here. She hesitated, then peered through the peephole. A woman stood there. She was unfamiliar. Blonde, early 30s, dressed in a simple gray coat. She looked anxious, glancing down the hallway as if expecting someone to appear. A sinking feeling twisted in Olivia's chest. Slowly, she opened the door a crack. The woman's head snapped up, her eyes locking onto Olivia's. There was something raw in her expression, fear, desperation. "Olivia Carter?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Olivia's pulse quickened. "Who are you?" The woman exhaled shakily, glancing down the hall again before stepping closer. "My name is Sophie Lark." The name meant nothing to Olivia, but the next words out of Sophie's mouth made her blood turn to ice. "I need to talk to you," she said. "It's about Ethan." Silence stretched between them. Shadow let out a low, warning growl. And for the first time, Olivia was terrified of what she was about to hear. Olivia's grip on the door tightened. The woman standing in front of her, Sophie, looked out of place in the sterile hallway, her coat buttoned up despite the mild weather, her blonde hair tucked behind her ears in a way that seemed more anxious than neat. But it was her eyes that unsettled Olivia the most. Wide, darting, filled with an urgency that made it impossible to dismiss her outright. She hesitated. Every instinct told her to close the door, to pretend this wasn't happening. But then Shadow let out a deep, guttural growl from beside her, his back arched, his green eyes fixed unblinkingly on Sophie. Olivia swallowed hard. "You said this is about Ethan." Sophie nodded quickly. "Please, I just need a few minutes." Olivia wavered for a moment longer, then stepped aside. The moment Sophie entered, she locked the door behind her, turning the deadbolt with a sharp click, as if she were afraid someone might follow. Olivia watched her warily, arms crossed, every nerve in her body on edge. Sophie took a deep breath, wringing her hands together before finally meeting Olivia's gaze. "I was engaged to Ethan," she said. The words hit like a slap. Olivia felt her pulse stutter, her entire body locking up. "What?" "A few years ago," Sophie continued, her voice tight, "we were supposed to get married. I thought he was perfect, just like you probably do now." Olivia's skin prickled. This had to be some kind of mistake, a misunderstanding, a coincidence. Except it wasn't. Because suddenly things started clicking into place. Ethan's reluctance to talk about his past, the way he always brushed off questions about his exes, the odd gaps in his stories that she had ignored in favor of the perfect image he presented. She inhaled sharply. "Why should I believe you?" Sophie's jaw clenched. "Because I made the mistake of ignoring the signs." She exhaled, then pulled something from her coat pocket and held it out. A phone. Not her current one, but an older model, cracked along the edges. Olivia's stomach twisted as she read. "Ethan, you're overreacting. You knew what this was from the beginning. Sophie, I loved you. I trusted you. You used me. Ethan, you'll regret making this difficult." Olivia's fingers trembled slightly as she scrolled through the messages. There were more. Too many. Some were affectionate, manipulative in their charm. Others were cold, dismissive. But they all painted a picture she wasn't ready to face. This, her voice cracked. This could be anyone. Sophie's expression hardened. "I have more." She pulled up emails, bank statements, documents showing how Ethan had slowly drained her savings over the course of their relationship, convincing her to invest in things that never existed, to trust him with financial decisions that had left her completely shattered. And then there were the photos. Olivia's breath caught as she saw a familiar image, a romantic dinner, candlelit, wine glasses in hand. It looked almost identical to the night Ethan had proposed to her, except it wasn't her in the picture. It was Sophie. A sickening realization churned in her stomach. "Moves from woman to woman," Sophie said quietly. "Presents himself as everything you want, and by the time you realize who he really is, it's too late." Olivia's heart pounded in her ears. "Why didn't you—" She stopped, her throat closing around the words. "Why didn't you warn me sooner?" Sophie seemed to hear it anyway. "I tried," she murmured. "But Ethan is careful. He makes sure no one from his past ever gets close enough to ruin his next opportunity." She exhaled sharply. "You were next, Olivia." The room suddenly felt too small, too stifling. Olivia staggered back a step, shaking her head. "No." "Ethan? He wouldn't." But even as she said it, she knew she was lying to herself. The unease, the secrecy, the missing pieces she had brushed off because she had wanted to believe in the dream. Sophie took a step closer, her voice firm. "If you don't believe me, ask him. But be careful. The moment he realizes you're doubting him, he won't try to win you over. He'll turn on you." A sharp knock at the door sent a bolt of terror through Olivia's body. Both women froze. Then, Ethan's voice. "Liv? You home?" Olivia's breath hitched. Sophie's eyes went wide with alarm. Shadow let out another growl, his tail puffed out like a warning siren. Ethan knocked again, more insistently this time. "Leave?" Sophie grabbed Olivia's wrist, her grip tight. "Don't let him know I'm here." Olivia hesitated, every instinct warring inside her. She nodded, quickly shoving Sophie toward her bedroom. The woman slipped inside just as Olivia stepped toward the door, pressing a hand to her chest to steady her racing heart before unlocking it. Ethan smiled when she opened it, but the moment his gaze flickered over her, something shifted. His expression tightened, like he could sense that something was off. "Hey," he said smoothly, stepping inside. "Why didn't you answer?" Olivia forced a laugh. "I was in the shower." Ethan's eyes lingered on her for a beat too long. Then, as if reassured, he leaned in and kissed her cheek. His touch, once familiar and warm, now sent ice crawling up her spine. She felt trapped. "Everything okay?" he asked, glancing around. Olivia nodded quickly. "Yeah, just tired." Ethan studied her for a moment. Then his gaze flicked toward the bedroom door. Shadow was sitting in front of it, motionless, watching. Something unreadable passed through Ethan's expression. "Your cat still hates me," he muttered, stuffing his hands into his pockets. Olivia swallowed. "He's just protective." A slow smile spread across Ethan's face, but there was no warmth in it. "Of course he is." Her heart pounded against her ribs. He knew something was off. And Olivia had a terrifying feeling that the moment she let her guard down, he would prove just how dangerous he really was. Olivia felt the air shift between them, a nearly imperceptible tension that coiled around her spine like a snake. Ethan was watching her too closely, his blue eyes searching for something beneath the surface. Something she wasn't sure she could keep buried. Shadow sat unmoving in front of the bedroom door, his green eyes locked onto Ethan with unblinking intensity. It was as if the cat knew what Olivia now feared to acknowledge. "I had a weird dream last night," she said suddenly, her voice strained, her pulse hammering against her ribs. Ethan tilted his head, his smile a little too patient. "Oh, about what?" She forced a breath, hoping he couldn't see how shaken she was. "About the wedding. I was walking down the aisle, but Shadow ran in front of me and started hissing at you. No one could move him. He just wouldn't let me get to you." She watched him carefully, searching for a reaction. Ethan's expression didn't falter. "Guess that means you're anxious," he said smoothly, stepping toward her, his hands finding her waist. "It's normal to feel that way before a big day." But Olivia didn't move into his embrace the way she usually would. She felt her body stiffen, her fingers curling at her sides instead of wrapping around his arms. "Yeah," she murmured, "maybe." Ethan pulled back slightly, eyes narrowing just a fraction. It was so subtle that if she hadn't been looking for it, she might have missed it. "You sure everything's okay?" Her mouth felt dry. "Yeah, just tired." She turned away before she could see the way his gaze lingered on her, sharp and assessing. The room felt suffocating. She needed to get out. "I have some last-minute wedding errands to run," she said quickly, heading toward the kitchen, needing to put distance between them. "I should probably get going soon." Ethan leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, watching her. "Want me to come with you?" No, it's just boring stuff," she said with a forced laugh, grabbing her coat. "Dress fittings, table settings, stuff you'd hate." He chuckled, shaking his head. "Fair enough. I have some work to do anyway." She nodded too quickly, reaching for the door handle. "I'll see you later, then." But before she could turn it, his hand landed gently over hers. Her breath caught. She turned to find him standing closer than before, his face just inches from hers. His eyes, usually warm and inviting, felt colder now, calculating. Live, he murmured, his fingers tightening slightly. Her heartbeat roared in her ears. Yeah? Ethan studied her for a long moment, his thumb brushing against the inside of her wrist. You'd tell me if something was wrong, wouldn't you? She swallowed hard. The words felt like a test, a trap. Of course, she said, forcing her voice to remain steady. His gaze lingered for a second longer, then he smiled, dropping his hand. Good. I'll see you tonight. She didn't look back as she stepped outside. The moment the door clicked shut behind her, she exhaled shakily, pressing a hand to her chest. Her heart was pounding. Ethan knew. He might not know everything, but he knew enough to be suspicious. She pulled out her phone with trembling fingers and texted Harper. Olivia, I need to see you. Now. Harper's reply came almost immediately. Harper, I'm home. What's going on? Olivia didn't answer. She just started walking. By the time she arrived at Harper's apartment, she was still rattled, the weight of Sophie's words pressing heavily on her. The moment Harper opened the door, her eyes widened. Jesus, Liv, you look like you just saw a ghost. Olivia stepped inside without answering, pacing the living room as Harper shut the door. I think he knows, she whispered, wrapping her arms around herself. Harper frowned. Ethan? Olivia nodded. I mean, not everything, but something. He was watching me like he was waiting for me to slip up. And when I tried to leave, She broke off, shaking her head. I don't know. It felt wrong. Harper grabbed her shoulders. Okay, slow down. What happened? Olivia took a deep breath and told her everything. About Sophie, about the messages, about the key. When she finished, Harper's face had gone pale. Oh my God. I don't know what to do, Olivia's voice cracked. The wedding is in a few days and I feel like I'm about to marry a stranger. A dangerous stranger. Harper was silent for a long moment. Then she grabbed Olivia's hands. We need to find out what that key opens. Olivia hesitated. Sophie said. Screw what Sophie said, Harper cut in. If we don't have proof, Ethan can gaslight you into thinking you're crazy, and I'm not letting that happen. Olivia swallowed. Harper's jaw tightened. You said it's a storage unit key, right? Olivia nodded. Harper grabbed her laptop, typing quickly. We start there. An hour later, they sat in Harper's car outside a run-down storage facility on the outskirts of the city. Olivia's stomach churned as she stared at the row of metal doors, each locked with a heavy padlock. Harper turned off the engine. You ready? No. But Olivia nodded anyway. They stepped out, the gravel crunching under their feet as they approached the unit number that matched the key Ethan had pocketed. Olivia hesitated. If he finds out, then we'll deal with it. Harper's voice was firm. You need to know the truth. With shaky hands, Olivia fit the key into the lock. It clicked open. The metal door groaned as she pulled it up. And then, Olivia felt her stomach drop. Inside, neatly organized on metal shelves, were boxes. Dozens of them. Each labeled with a name. A different name. Harper grabbed one at random, yanking it open. Inside were documents, photos, old love letters. A cold wave of nausea rolled through Olivia as she recognized the woman in one of the pictures. Sophie. Harper let out a slow breath. Oh my God. Olivia's hands trembled as she reached for another box. This one had her name on it. She opened it. Inside were photos of her, notes about her life, copies of bank statements, receipts from places she and Ethan had visited together. A record of everything he had ever done to weave himself into her life. Her blood turned to ice. She had been a project, a target. Harper's fingers tightened on her arm. "Liv, we need to get out of here." But Olivia couldn't move, because right there, tucked beneath a stack of documents, was something that made her breath catch. A marriage license, dated for next week, signed only by Ethan. Her vision swam. He had already planned everything. Even if she had backed out, he had intended to make sure she never had the chance. A sharp buzz from her phone jolted her back to reality. A message from Ethan. "Ethan, where are you?" Olivia's heart nearly stopped. Harper grabbed the phone, staring at the screen. "Liv." Another message appeared. "Ethan, I know you're not home." A final message. He thought, "Come back before it's too late." The blood drained from Olivia's face. Shadow had been right. And now she knew the truth. She had to get away from Ethan before he made sure she never could. Olivia's fingers went numb as she stared at the screen, the last message from Ethan burning into her vision like a brand. "Come back before it's too late." The words felt less like a request and more like a threat. Her stomach twisted violently, nausea climbing her throat as her mind raced through all the possibilities. Did he already know she had been here? Had he been watching her? Or was this just his way of asserting control, of making sure she never had the chance to slip away? Harper grabbed her wrist, her grip tight. "Liv, we have to go. Now." Olivia's breath hitched, her pulse roaring in her ears. She knew Harper was right, but her body refused to move. Because for the first time since meeting Ethan, she realized just how much danger she was really in. This wasn't just about a failed relationship. This wasn't just about lies. This was about survival. Harper yanked the storage unit door shut with a metallic slam, then shoved Olivia toward the car. "Come on." The night air was cold against Olivia's skin as she stumbled forward, her heart hammering in her chest. She fumbled with the passenger door handle, throwing herself inside just as Harper slid behind the wheel and twisted the key in the ignition. The car roared to life. Harper reversed so fast the tires screeched, gravel kicking up in clouds behind them. Okay, it's fine," Harper muttered, her knuckles white on the steering wheel as they sped out of the lot. "We got what we needed. You have proof. You don't have to go through with the wedding. We can go to the police, we can—" Olivia's phone buzzed again. She flinched so hard it nearly slipped from her grasp. Another message. "Ethan, are you with Harper?" A cold shiver crawled up Olivia's spine. She turned, glancing over her shoulder, her breath coming in sharp bursts. The road behind them was dark and empty. But it didn't feel empty. It felt like they were being watched. She gripped Harper's arm. "Drive faster." Harper didn't argue. She pressed down on the gas, the speedometer creeping up as the city lights blurred past them. Another buzz. Olivia didn't want to look, but she did. "Ethan, if you don't answer me, I'll assume the worst." Assume the worst? What the hell did that mean? Her fingers trembled as she typed out a reply, keeping it short, vague. "Olivia, I'll see you at home." The response came immediately. "Ethan, go." She exhaled shakily, pressing the phone against her lap. He knows something. Harper didn't take her eyes off the road. "Yeah, no kiddin'." A tense silence stretched between them as they turned onto Olivia's street. The familiar sight of her apartment building loomed ahead, a place that had once felt safe. Now it felt like a trap. Harper slowed, but Olivia's stomach sank when she spotted a sleek black car parked on the curb. Ethan's car. Her entire body locked up. Harper cursed under her breath, pulling up a few spaces behind him. Okay. Maybe he's just... The driver's side door opened. Ethan stepped out. Even in the dim glow of the streetlights, Olivia could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he straightened his cuffs like he was preparing for something, for a fight. For her. Harper's hand shot out, grabbing Olivia's arm before she could move. Liv, don't. Let's go somewhere else. You don't have to. No. Olivia swallowed hard, forcing her voice to stay steady. If I run, he wins. Harper's jaw clenched. I don't like this. Neither did Olivia. But she couldn't hide forever. Slowly, she reached for the door handle and stepped out. The moment her feet hit the pavement, Ethan's head snapped toward her, and he smiled. But it wasn't his usual easy, charming smile. This one was different. Colder, sharper, like he knew something she didn't. Harper got out behind her, arms crossed, stance defiant. Ethan! Ethan's gaze barely flickered to her before settling back on Olivia. Harper. A pause. Then he tilted his head slightly, watching Olivia with an expression so unreadable it sent a chill down her spine. You didn't answer my call, he murmured. Olivia forced herself to keep her breathing steady. I was busy. Ethan hummed like he didn't believe her. Then his gaze dropped slightly to her hand. She still had her phone in her grip. The same phone that had just sent him a text saying, I'll see you at home. His lips twitched. You weren't home. Olivia's pulse pounded. Harper shifted beside her, as if sensing the shift in energy. She doesn't have to check in with you, Ethan. Ethan didn't even glance at her. Of course she doesn't. His eyes never left Olivia's. But I do think it's funny, Liv, that you'd rather spend the night with Harper than with me. His voice was calm, too calm. A warning. Harper stiffened beside her. You don't own her. Ethan finally turned his gaze to Harper and smiled. I never said I did. Olivia swallowed, every instinct in her body screaming at her to leave, to get away. But she couldn't back down now. She straightened, forcing her voice to stay even. I'm tired, Ethan. I just want to go inside. A beat of silence. Then, just like that, the tension snapped. Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. Of course. Big day coming up, right? His voice was light again, warm, normal. But it was an act. She could see it now. The shift. The mask slipping back into place. He took a step back, gesturing toward the door. Go get some rest, Liv. She hesitated, then nodded. She walked up the steps with Harper at her side, feeling Ethan's eyes on her the entire time. When she reached the door, she made the mistake of glancing back. Ethan was still watching, still smiling. And just before she stepped inside, he mouthed 3 words that made her blood run cold. See you soon. The door clicked shut behind her, but Olivia knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The apartment felt different when Olivia stepped inside. The air was thick, pressing against her chest like a weight she couldn't shake off. It wasn't just the encounter with Ethan. It was everything. The secrets, the lies, the carefully constructed reality that had begun to crumble beneath her feet. She had spent 2 years believing she knew the man she was about to marry, But the truth had been hiding in plain sight, waiting for her to open her eyes. And now that she had, there was no going back. Harper locked the door behind them, flipping the deadbolt twice. She turned to Olivia, voice tight. "You're not staying here." Olivia barely heard her. She was staring at Shadow, who sat in the middle of the room, his tail flicking, his green eyes sharp as they locked onto hers. He didn't move, didn't meow, just watched. Like he was waiting. Harper stepped in front of her, snapping her fingers. "Liv, you're not staying here." "I don't have a choice," Olivia murmured, forcing herself to move, to do something other than stand frozen in place. She walked into the kitchen, her mind spinning as she reached for a glass of water with shaky hands. Harper followed. "Yes, you do. You come to my place. Hell, we book a hotel, leave the city, whatever. But you don't stay here and wait for him to do something." Olivia closed her eyes. She wanted to. God, she wanted to run. But if she ran, Ethan would know. He would win. She turned, gripping the counter. "I need proof." Harper exhaled sharply. "We have proof. We saw the storage unit. You saw the pictures, the files. That's not enough." Olivia's voice came out quieter than she intended. "We can't tie it to him. If I go to the police now, what do I say? That I found some storage boxes that might belong to him? He'll say I broke in, that I made it up, that I'm unstable." Harper's jaw clenched. She knew Olivia was right. Ethan was too careful, too meticulous. If they didn't have something undeniable, something concrete, he would twist the situation, make Olivia look like the crazy one. "We need something more," Olivia whispered. A beat of silence. Then Harper exhaled, rubbing a hand over her face. "Fine. What's the plan?" Olivia hesitated, the weight of what she was about to suggest settling deep in her chest. "I need to go through his stuff." Harper's eyes widened. "You mean Snoop?" "Yeah. Liv." Harper's voice was sharp now. "That's dangerous." Olivia met her gaze. "So is marrying him." That ended the argument. An hour later, Olivia sat on the floor of her bedroom, her heart slamming against her ribs as she rifled through the neatly folded clothes in Ethan's overnight bag. He had a drawer here, a toothbrush, spare suits hanging in the closet. He had woven himself into her life so seamlessly, so effortlessly, that it hadn't even seemed strange at the time. Now it made her skin crawl. Harper stood by the door, arms crossed, chewing on the inside of her cheek as Olivia carefully unzipped the bag's hidden compartment. There, her breath caught as her fingers brushed against something smooth and metallic. A second phone. She pulled it out, exchanging a glance with Harper. Harper exhaled. Bingo. Olivia's hands shook as she powered it on. The screen flickered to life, revealing a home screen that was completely bare. No wallpaper, no widgets, just a simple black background and a handful of apps. But one caught her attention immediately. Vault. Harper leaned in. "Try it." Olivia tapped it, but a passcode screen popped up. 4 digits. She cursed under her breath. Harper frowned. "Try his birthday." She did. Nothing. "Yours?" Wrong again. Olivia stared at the screen, her mind racing. What number would Ethan use? It had to be something he thought was secure, but easy enough for him to remember. Then it hit her. Her stomach twisted as she typed in the numbers. The date of their wedding. The screen unlocked. Harper inhaled sharply. Olivia's pulse roared in her ears as she scrolled through the files. Messages, emails, pictures, documents. And then her fingers froze, because right there, in cold, undeniable text, was her name. And beneath it, detailed notes about her habits, her accounts, her life. Harper swore under her breath. Holy shit. But Olivia barely heard her. She kept scrolling, her vision blurring as she found other names. Sophie. Others she didn't recognize. Ethan had done this before, over and over again, and she had almost been next. Her breath came in sharp, shaky gasps as she backed out of the files, her hands clammy against the device. Harper reached for her. Olivia. A noise. A key in the lock. They both froze. The apartment door opened. Footsteps. Ethan was home. Harper moved fast, yanking the phone from Olivia's hands and shoving it into her hoodie pocket, just as Olivia scrambled to zip the bag back up. A moment later, Ethan's voice carried down the hall. Liv, you here? Olivia forced her hands to stop trembling, pushing herself to her feet just as he appeared in the doorway. He smiled. There you are. She swallowed hard. Hey. His eyes flickered toward Harper. He didn't say anything at first, just studied her. Then, with that same too calm smile, he said, Didn't expect to see you tonight, Harper. Harper crossed her arms. Yeah, well, Olivia and I had some things to talk about. Ethan tilted his head slightly, like he was considering something. Then he stepped forward, sliding an arm around Olivia's waist. She barely held back the shiver that crawled up her spine. You okay? He murmured, pressing a kiss to her hair. She forced herself to nod. Yeah, she lied. Ethan's lips brushed her ear. Good. He pulled back, smiling down at her, but his grip didn't loosen. If anything, it tightened. And Olivia knew. He wasn't convinced. Not yet. But he was watching. Wait, and if she wasn't careful, if she made one wrong move, she might not make it out of this at all. Olivia could feel Ethan's fingers pressing just a little too firmly into the small of her back. A casual touch to anyone watching, but she knew better now. This wasn't affection. It was possession. A silent warning. Harper stayed completely still, her expression carefully neutral, but Olivia could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands curled into loose fists at her sides. She knew they had to play this carefully. Ethan's gaze flickered between them before he finally released Olivia, stepping back. His easy smile returned, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. So, he said, slipping his hands into his pockets, what were you two talking about? Wedding stuff, Olivia said smoothly, forcing her voice to stay light. Seating arrangements. You know how my mom is. Ethan chuckled. Yeah, she's a force of nature. His eyes lingered on Olivia as if waiting for her to slip up. Then slowly he nodded. Well, don't let me interrupt. Harper took that as her cue. She grabbed her bag from the couch and slung it over her shoulder. Actually, I was just leaving. Ethan didn't stop her, didn't question it, but Olivia saw the flicker of something in his expression as Harper passed him, like he knew she was running, and he was letting her. For now. Olivia walked her to the door, keeping her movements controlled, normal. The second the door shut behind Harper, Ethan turned to her. You're acting different. Her pulse jumped, but she forced herself to laugh. What? Ethan studied her, his head tilting slightly, like he was watching for cracks in the surface. You seem off. She shook her head. I'm just tired. It's been a long day. He took a step closer. "You'd tell me if something was wrong, wouldn't you?" The way he said it made her throat go dry. She nodded. Of course. Ethan's smile didn't falter. "Good." Then he reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers grazing her skin. "You know I'd do anything for you, Liv." The words made her stomach churn. He wasn't reassuring her. He was reminding her. She swallowed the lump in her throat and nodded. "I know." His eyes stayed on hers for a second too long. Then he finally stepped back. "I should go." Relief crashed over her so fast it almost made her dizzy. Ethan kissed her cheek, lingering for just a second, then he grabbed his jacket and headed for the door. "Get some rest," he said, voice casual. "Big day tomorrow." She forced herself to smile. "Yeah, see you then." The door clicked shut behind him. The moment he was gone, Olivia locked it. Then she turned and bolted for the bathroom. She barely made it before she was on her knees, dry heaving into the toilet. Her whole body shook, her mind spinning with the weight of what had just happened, what had almost happened. She had lied to his face, and he had known. She could feel it. Ethan wasn't fooled. He might have left tonight, but he wasn't going to stay gone. He was going to watch her, wait for her, and when the moment was right, when he was sure she had nowhere to run, he was going to destroy her. The next morning, Olivia barely heard the sound of voices in the bridal suite. The makeup artist was talking, her mother was fussing over final details, but it all blurred together into meaningless noise. She sat in front of the vanity, staring at her reflection. She looked rum. The wedding dress was perfect. The lace, the delicate embroidery, everything she had dreamed of. And yet, she felt like a stranger wearing someone else's skin. Knock, knock. Her mother perked up. "Oh, that must be Ethan." A sharp growl rumbled from the floor. Olivia's head snapped down. Shadow was sitting next to her chair, his ears flat against his skull, his tail flicking dangerously. Not a warning, a threat. Her mother frowned. "Honestly, Olivia, that cat of yours has been acting strange for weeks." Another knock. Firm, impatient. Ethan's voice came through the door. "Liv? Can I come in?" Shadow hissed, his fur bristling. Olivia's breath caught in her throat. Not before the ceremony. Not now. Her mother was already moving toward the door, but Olivia's voice cut through the air. "No." Her mother stopped, blinking. "Sweetheart?" Olivia swallowed hard. "It's bad luck," she said quickly. "You know that." Silence. Then, from the other side of the door, a pause, a heartbeat of hesitation. Then Ethan chuckled. Of course. But there was something underneath it. A sharp edge. A quiet understanding. He knew. Her mother beamed. "Well, good. Tradition is important." She turned back to Olivia, completely unaware of the war happening behind her daughter's eyes. "Come on now, sweetheart. Let's get you into your dress." Olivia forced herself to move, to breathe, to survive. The ceremony began. The guests were seated beneath the grand canopy of white roses and golden lights. The music played softly. The scent of fresh-cut flowers filled the warm evening air. It was perfect. Too perfect. Olivia stood at the entrance of the garden, hidden behind the hedges. Shadow sat beside her. He hadn't left her side all morning. He knew something was wrong. So did she. She could see Ethan standing at the altar, his suit perfectly pressed, his expression calm. Wait, and for the first time, Olivia saw it. The truth. She had spent 2 years convincing herself Ethan was everything she wanted. She had ignored the red flags, the gaps in his past, the way he always seemed too perfect, too polished, too controlled. She had been desperate to believe she had finally found something real. But real love didn't feel like this. Real love didn't make your pulse spike with fear. Real love didn't make you wonder if you would make it out alive. Shadow tensed beside her. And then the music changed. Her cue. She took one step forward. Then another. The guests turned, smiled. Ethan smiled too. But Olivia's stomach twisted. Something about the way he was looking at her. Like he already knew what was coming. Like this was the final move in a game he had already won. Shadow growled. A sharp, visceral sound that sent a ripple through the crowd. Then, before Olivia could react, he lunged. The growl turned into a snarl as Shadow darted forward, cutting in front of Olivia, his body rigid, snarling, unrelenting. Gasps echoed through the garden. Ethan's expression shifted. For the first time, his mask cracked, because he knew this wasn't just a cat acting out. This was Olivia's last warning, her last chance, and in that split second, as she locked eyes with the man she almost married, she finally listened. She turned and ran. Olivia didn't think. She didn't hesitate. The moment Shadow lunged, she turned on her heel and ran. Gasps rippled through the crowd, confusion sweeping over the sea of guests as they watched the bride flee her own wedding. But Olivia didn't stop. She tore through the garden, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her veil trailing behind her like a ghost of the life she had almost condemned herself to. Behind her she heard a commotion, chairs scraping, voices rising, footsteps pounding. And then, Olivia! Ethan's voice cut through the noise, sharp, commanding. She ran faster. Her heart thundered in her chest as she pushed past the hedge-lined pathway, the heavy fabric of her dress tangling around her legs. She didn't care. She needed to get away. Now, the cool night air burned in her lungs as she stumbled onto the gravel path leading toward the parking lot. Her hands fumbled for the hem of her dress, hiking it up so she could move faster. A hand grabbed her wrist. Her breath hitched. She whipped around, already prepared to fight, to claw, to do whatever it took to escape. But it wasn't Ethan. It was Harper. "Get in the car!" Harper shouted, already pulling her toward the passenger side of her beat-up sedan. Shadow darted past them, leaping into the back seat with a guttural growl. Olivia didn't ask questions. She didn't stop to explain. She just threw herself inside as Harper slammed the door shut behind her and peeled out of the lot, tires screeching against the pavement. The wedding venue disappeared in the rear-view mirror. Olivia's hands trembled as she yanked off her veil, her pulse roaring in her ears. Harper's grip on the wheel was so tight her knuckles had turned white. "Jesus Christ," she panted. "I knew you were going to leave, but I didn't think you were going to full-on movie sprint out of there." Olivia sucked in a shaky breath. I couldn't do it." Harper nodded sharply. "Good, because if you had, I would have dragged you out myself." Olivia swallowed hard, her entire body shaking as the adrenaline coursed through her. She twisted in her seat, glancing over her shoulder, half expecting to see Ethan's car tailing them down the highway. But the road behind them was empty. For now. She slumped back against the seat, pressing her hands to her face. "I almost married him." Harper's jaw tightened. Yeah, and you almost signed away your entire life to a goddamn sociopath. But you didn't. You got out. The reality of what had just happened crashed into Olivia like a freight train. She had left Ethan, publicly, humiliating him, exposing him, and he wasn't going to let that slide. She dropped her hands, voice barely above a whisper. He's going to come after me. Harper didn't even hesitate. I know. They didn't stop driving until they were nearly an hour outside the city, Harper finally pulling into a motel lot on the outskirts of nowhere. The neon vacancy sign buzzed overhead as she killed the engine. You're staying here tonight, Harper said firmly. I already booked a room, under a fake name. Olivia blanked. You... what? Harper shot her a look. What, like I wasn't going to plan ahead? I knew you'd need somewhere safe. The moment you told me you weren't sure about him, I started making backup plans. Olivia's throat tightened. She didn't deserve Harper. Harper pulled the key from the ignition, turning to her. We lay low for a couple of days, let things cool off. Then, we figure out what comes next. Olivia nodded slowly, exhaling. Okay. She didn't realize she was still gripping the fabric of her wedding dress until she stepped out of the car. It felt heavy now, suffocating, a relic of a life she had just barely escaped. She ripped it off. Right there in the parking lot, she grabbed fistfuls of lace and tore. The bodice ripped down the middle, the fabric splitting with a satisfying snarl as she yanked it off her shoulders. She kicked off her heels, pulled the pins from her hair, shed everything that tied her to Ethan. Harper smirked. Dramatic, but I approve. They checked into the motel under the dim fluorescent lights, the receptionist barely looking up from his newspaper as he handed them the key. Harper tossed her bag onto one of the beds, then turned to Olivia. Okay. Shower, food, sleep. In that order. Olivia let out a small, broken laugh. Yes, ma'am. Hours later, Olivia lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Shadow was curled up beside her, his rhythmic purring the only sound in the room. Harper was sprawled out on the other bed, already asleep, one arm hanging off the mattress. Olivia should have been exhausted, but she was wide awake. Her phone sat on the nightstand, face down, the screen dark. She hadn't checked it since leaving the wedding, hadn't dared, because she knew. Ethan had called. Ethan had texted. Ethan was looking for her. Her stomach twisted as she reached for it, her fingers hovering over the screen. Then she flipped it over. 10 missed calls. 37 messages. And one single voicemail. Her hand shook as she pressed play. Ethan's voice filled the room. Calm. Steady. Wrong. Olivia. A soft sigh. That wasn't very nice. Silence. Then, I know you're scared. I know Harper got inside your head. But you're making a mistake. Another pause. And then, lower, colder. You don't get to walk away from me. Her breath caught in her throat. You think you can run. You think I won't find you? A short chuckle. You don't know me as well as you think you do, Liv. The message ended. Olivia sat frozen, the phone slipping from her fingers. Shadow stirred beside her, pressing against her side. She barely breathed. Ethan knew. He knew she wasn't coming back. And now he was coming for her. The days stretched into weeks. The headlines faded. The whispers dulled. Life, as it always did, moved on. Olivia spent the first few days hiding, afraid to check the news, afraid to step outside, afraid of what Ethan would do next. But then she moved forward, piece by piece. She found a new apartment, somewhere small, untraceable. She got rid of her old number, cut ties, and she made sure Ethan would never find her again. One afternoon, she walked past an animal shelter and stopped. She didn't know why, but she went inside. A volunteer smiled. Looking to adopt? She almost said no. But then she saw him, a small gray kitten, curled up in the corner of a cage, timid, unsure, but still standing. Something inside her settled. She smiled. "I think my cat needs a little sister." The volunteer beamed. "His name is Lucky." Olivia exhaled. "That's perfect." That night, she sat on the floor of her new apartment, safe. Shadow curled against her leg, Lucky at her side. For the first time in weeks, she felt something close to peace. She had spent so much time mourning a future that was never real. But now, she was finally building a life that was. Thank you for staying until the very end of this story. It means a lot that you took the time to listen. This story isn't just about a runaway bride. It's about trusting your instincts. It's about paying attention to the small signs, the gut feelings, the quiet warnings that we often try to ignore. Olivia almost lost herself in a carefully crafted illusion, but when she finally saw the truth, she made the hardest and bravest decision: to walk away. In life, we often convince ourselves to stay in situations that feel wrong because we don't want to start over, because we're afraid of what happens next. But sometimes, leaving is the only way to truly begin again. So, if you've ever doubted your gut, if you've ever felt that something wasn't right, listen to yourself. Your instincts are more powerful than you realize. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss another one. More stories are coming your way, and I can't wait to share them with you. Stay safe, stay strong, and always trust your intuition.